Omicron is as deadly and causes as much serious disease in the unvaccinated as Delta did. We have over 100,000 children, which we've never had before, in serious condition, and many on ventilators.
And now let's begin today's discussion by talking about the Omicron variant. According to a new study, which just came out of Denmark, the Omicron variant of the virus, it spreads a lot faster than the Delta variant among vaccinated individuals. Now, this particular study was conducted by a joint team of researchers at the University of Copenhagen, an organization called Statistics Denmark, as well as the Statens Serum Institute. And what these researchers did was that they closely examined nearly 12,000 Danish households, and they discovered that the Omicron variant, it spreads faster than the Delta variant, specifically among those who are fully vaccinated. And even more surprising is that they found that it spreads even faster among those who have received booster shots.
Okay, y'all, so I started looking, and all I could find is Omicron is not more severe for children, despite rising hospitalizations. That goes against everything, right? Everything that they're trying to scare us with. But if you look at the stats, yeah, there's an increase. Like New York saw 68 kids hospitalized, but in New York, 68 children. It appears to be causing milder illness in children, similar to early findings for adults. So yeah, they're getting it, but it's not super bad. And some of them might need hospitalizations, but look at this. So you can go to Johns Hopkins weekly hospitalization trends, and you can look at any state and see the patterns. Now, a lot of states are still seeing a little surge where the flu has come in and everything's kind of blossomed a little bit. But you can look at all the beds and how they're divvied up and how many beds are left and which ones are ICU and which ones are inpatient. And then you can look between and see which ones are non-COVID and COVID beds. The orange are the COVID beds. And you'll notice in most states, COVID is still at a very small incremental status. I mean, it's just, there's not a lot going on, that they want to tell you, other than they just want to make you expect the worst. But when you can go to places like this and break it down and see the numbers for yourself, then you reduce the fear, the emotion that they try to plant within you. You can go and see for yourself. And then you can educate yourself. And there is no fear. There is no guesswork. There is no thinking if one state's seeing it, then all the others are as well. When you can go and check for yourself. And if you look, a lot of the northeastern states are being hammered by this. But in other states that have more space, they're not. Well, duh. People that live on top of each other are going to spread things more rapidly. We're not stupid. But if you look at some of the other states that are the least vaccinated, some of the least vaccinated states have some of the least hospitalizations as well. It's kind of odd. Honestly, the only consistency that we can see is if there's more space in a state and people are not on top of each other, then there is less transmissibility and less hospitalizations. That is kind of the norm that I'm seeing. But even in the highly vaccinated states such as Florida and New York, they're experiencing kind of polar opposite issues, even though they have a similar vaccination rate. So you really have to take this independently. You have to look at each individual state, and you have to follow the information and get this information for yourself in a timely fashion. And you'll understand why I say in a timely fashion in just a moment. So I'm just going through some of these states, as you can see, and trying to show you some of the difference between all the beds, all the inpatient beds, and then the ICU capacity beds. When you switch over to ICU capacity beds, you can break it down even farther and get a closer view. And we're starting to see that in some of the states where we had more beds a few months ago, we have fewer beds now because we have fewer nurses to cover beds. That is one of the biggest differences that I'm seeing, because I have watched this website, as you all know, for many, many months. So I have been on top of this website for a long time. So I'm seeing that, look, did you see the bed drop in that one? I'm just saying, pay attention, people. There's a lot more going on than just numbers going up and down and up and down and up and down. So here I'm just going through a few more states. Pennsylvania. It's kind of odd to see how some of the states break down. South Dakota, I just want to move to South Dakota. They had to zoom that in because there's so few issues in South Dakota. I want to be in a state where we have to zoom it in because there's so few issues. Look at the Virgin Islands. Huh. Like they had 0 the other day. They've only got like 2, I believe, in the hospital now with COVID. I think I'll switch over and see that there's 2 in just a minute. Yep, there's 2. People, isn't it funny that where the mass media also resides, New York, California, isn't it funny how those states are also hammered, slammed, always in crisis mode? But when you get in places that don't have mass media, that don't have large news media stations, isn't it funny how it changes to where, it's not that big of an ordeal? I've noticed that consistency across the board as well. And that's just my perspective. And I may be completely wrong, but that's just my interpretation of what I'm seeing. Now, I go through a lot of this. It's something that you can go and Google yourself. It is the weekly hospitalization trends through Johns Hopkins. You can look up any state and you can see all inpatient beds and all ICU beds broken down from a non COVID and COVID perspective. Great tool. Do not ever absorb the fear they're trying to tell you ever again, because you can go here and look it up now. Remember that one time when Biden said New York was basically overrun, and we went to look at the numbers in New York, and New York was not overrun? Excuse me, I had to block out a message that I got from my husband. Ignore the scribble. Remember when we looked that up and it was incorrect, and we knew at that point that Biden had lied? Well, start doing this for yourself and start looking at other things as well, because I noticed some other stuff. When I started to Google, I started seeing a trend. Now, this is the vaccine rates by state. Least vaccinated are the lighter, most vaccinated are the more. Look, now remember when I said news media, look at the dark green. Where are most of the news media? They're coastal, right? That's where most of the issues are. That's also where most of the crowding are. But look at the flyover states where there's more space, there's less population, people live in a more rural setting, and we're not on top of each other. A lot of states that don't have buses and cabs and people jammed in transport all the time on top of each other. They don't have as high numbers as well, because we don't have people constantly on top of each other. There's very simple reasons behind the spread of this, and it's not an eerily scary, it's coming to get you boogeyman scenario. It is simply a virus that is transmissible, and it's being spread in places where people are bunched together like cattle on a sale lot. Now, I tried to work this. This is a government, it's supposed to be a hospitalizations by state, a government site. I could not make this freaking thing work. Look at me trying. It only gives you certain states. It wouldn't let me look up other states. It was not, the readability was not good. The user interface sucked. Notice that every graph I go to, when I am given a few options, they all look very much the same. And look how blown up they are. Now, there should only be about a 17% increase in hospitalizations, but look at this jump. Now, I know there's a 17% increase because I've already done my research, but look at this jump. And no matter how I tried to go about this, it's not going to function correctly. And when I click on other stuff, and I'm just wanting to see Tennessee, it won't even allow me to see Tennessee. It's like, no, you may not, even though it's hospitalizations by state, you may not see Tennessee. So here in a minute I give up and I'm like, screw it. So I'm like, go to another state, and I'm like, okay, but this graph just looks exactly like the other one. So then I go back to the user interface, and I'm trying to figure out what I've done. Okay, let's go back and just look at other states. Let's make sure we're looking at states that is, and we're going, okay, let's try to type this in again. No results found. Tennessee is not found. You cannot, even though it's hospitalizations by state, Tennessee is, you can't find it. So I go down here and I start clicking on these. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll just look at the ones you give me. I'll give up and just look at the ones you give me. Well, wouldn't you know it, when you start clicking on them, they all look exactly the same. So I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to do here, but I just will tell you that the readability and user interface on this site sucked. You couldn't determine anything. You couldn't get anywhere you wanted to get. And I don't know if this is just a tactic they're using or if this was just pure stupidity. But when I rolled down here, these were states and numbers. And because I've done my research, I knew that these were not looking correct. And so I just decided that perhaps this had not been kept up. And perhaps it was just out of date and nobody had tended the site. The information did not match the Johns Hopkins information. And so I gave up on this site altogether. This is where you have to try numerous sites and keep looking, keep paying attention. So we go back and we're like, okay, well, let's look at another. Now, I just Googled hospitalizations and vaccinations per state. That's what I'm Googling here. And it's so funny because here I go, going to a state level. Look at this. Children represent 17.4% of all cases. 7% increase in cases. Children range from 1.7 to 4.1 of all hospitalizations and 0.1 to 1.6 only go in hospital. So 1.7 to 4.1 of all cases, but only 0.1 to 1.6 ever end up in the hospital. Cases of death is 0 to 0.02% in kids. That's it. So they're exacerbating the fear. So let's go back and let's look at something else. So I go up here and I'm like, okay, let's go to the New York Times. Least vaccinated states lead spike in children's cases, leaving some hospitals stretched. But watch this. This is what, when you're looking stuff up, look, that's from September 5th of last year, September 9th of last year. September of last year. But I Googled it today, and that's one of the leading stories that popped up. Google, what you doing? What you doing, Google? What are you up to? And look at these graphs. Look at these spikes. Look how they're zoomed in to show these 7% increases. They make them look like giant behemoth mountains. Y'all, someone reading this that did not pay attention to the state or to the date would think it was horrible. Now look at the states. Read what that said. It was like only a 10 and one. It was like such a small statistic that they had blown up the graphs to make it look like a mountain. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? So these are some of the tricks they play. So you know something? Let's just go to Georgia. This is supposed to be COVID hospitalizations in the U.S. This is supposed to be COVID in Georgia. Well, look again, people. Look at what we found. I'm searching this in January. Looking in Georgia. Look, September 17th of last year. People, pay attention when you're Googling. And again, all of this information, no longer viable. It's from last year. Oddly enough, this is from the time last year when RSV was being sky high in children everywhere. There was a huge RSV surge in children. Everything I'm looking up that is showing these huge numbers is the RSV surge. It's not the COVID. Oh, so it's September of last year, not January. So I'm like, listen, I've got to get some truth. Where can I get some truth? Surely, what is it, the Academy of Pediatrics? Surely they'll tell me the truth, right? So this is the Academy of Pediatrics. Let's hope they'll tell me the truth. So I'm going through this website and I'm looking, and it's confirming what I found in my other research. Children are about 17% of those being afflicted. Yeah, we know that, right? That's what it said on the other website. So we're getting some consistency now. But this is still September. But look down here. Now they're talking about December. Children represent 17.4% of all cases. Thank God this is from December. Isn't it funny that they have them both on the same page? Look, 1.7 to 4.1 of all hospitalizations and only 0.1 to 1.6 ever result in like a COVID hospitalization. So we're seeing RSV and COVID hospitalized children. We're seeing a 17% of, like, affected but only a 7% increase in hospitalizations. But look, 0 to 0.02% have only resulted in death. Do you know how microscopic that is? But yet they're all over. They're all over the TV and the newspapers screaming that there is a massive surge like none ever seen. Children are being hospitalized at a rate never seen. But look, mortality 0.00 to 0.27.
There's no doubt that there are more children getting infected. As I mentioned in one of my slides, the Delta variant is much more highly transmissible than was Alpha. So given that, you'll see more children likely get infected. And since you have a certain percentage of children, even though the percentage is small, certain percentage of children will require hospitalization. So quantitatively, you will see more children in the hospital. Regarding the severity of illness, there was a couple of studies, mostly international, which suggested that Delta was more severe in adults, namely causing more relative percentage of hospitalization and more severe disease. With regard to children, this could possibly be the case, but we are not seeing this in a definitive way. The only thing we know for sure is that more infections mean more children will be in the hospital.